Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the show, Susan. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to it. So for the listeners who may not know who you are, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work?
Oh, yes. Well, my name is Susan Schwartz, and I'm an analyst of Jungian psychology, which means that I work with people's dreams, their unconscious, their real deep inner world, to find the meaning and purpose of their life in a very serious, grounded way. And so we look at lots of symbols and meanings in events, inner and outer. So it's a combination of conscious and unconscious, inner, outer, and of course, relational.
I'm trying to think to myself, when's the last time I've come across a Jungian analyst?
Well,
it's
not very often.
Yeah.
I'll explain why, I think, which is that Jungian analytical psychology, different from other analytical or depth psychologies, looks for purpose, meaning spirit, but spirit not in religious, spirit in accessing oneself in a small way, but also in a very expansive way, which actually at this moment is totally needed in our history.
It is. I was just thinking that myself. I might need to come and book some sessions. That sounds, I'm like, oh yeah, I can't, since I was in grad school, I don't think I've come across, but it's so fascinating to me, just sort of taking that deeper dive. And that's why I'm super excited to have you on, because we're going to do just that today.
That is it. So in the little bit that we spoke just previous to our recording, because the whole topic is absent father effect on daughters. And what you had said, you made a comment about the depth of it, or you could say the absence of even the looking at the topic. So I think that we've all been rather educated, if that's the word, to eliminate fathers. Yes, well, if you think about it, look at the history of psychoanalysis from Freud, Jung, male. Now, I don't want to be stereotypical about it, but these were also men who did not have relationships with their fathers. And the way that people lived then and currently, the mother got all the credit and also all the blame for the psychological problems, issues, situations, and also good energy, intellect, etc. of the children. The fathers could do nothing. They never had to do anything. They could just classically go and work. This has changed some, not enough as far as I'm concerned. Not enough. Well, so many people, and this is part of the writing of the book, so many people who come into my office, I will ask them about their father. They have a one-liner. That's it. He was either present when they were little, or then he left, or he was never there, or he was there and not there, or he was alcoholic, drugs, or worked too much, just not present. So physically absent, psychologically absent, emotionally absent, because he probably had an absent father as well. So through the generations, we have inherited and accepted the absence of the father and not questioned it. So when I ask people, do you have anything more to say other than no? So they have written off their own pain, their own sorrow, and their own loss from not having a father. Mm-hmm. It becomes normalized.
Yeah.
Normal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why do you think it is that this has gone on so long generationally?
You know, subtly and not so subtly, we've all made an agreement. So many of the women that I see, when I question them, kind of prod it a little bit, they will say, well, he was a quiet man. Could you talk to him? No, he screamed every day at the dinner table. Could you talk to him? No, he was in his room. Could you ever talk to him? I never knew him. Or could you ever talk to him? Well, I found him again when I was a teenager or a young adult. Did anything change? No. No, he was still not relatable. I don't think fathers, and I don't want to be stereotypical about it, I don't think they learned how. Women learn it. You get taught that's how you are as a good kid. You have to relate, you take care, you look out for, etc. The boys, fathers, they don't have to. They don't have to relate. And much to the loss of them and also to their daughters.
And I don't know if you've had experience in terms of working with men also who have the same challenges. What do you see there?
You know, it is so interesting. Because I've thought about this a lot. Are the men different? Are they different? And I can't come up with much because the lack is emotional and psychological. Even if you think about it, because I've been questioned. So what about men? What about how people define themselves as far as their gender goes? What about their social class? What about their race? What about their religious background? There is a certain very strange similarity in all of them. They all have a very similar lack, absence. It's like a space in the psyche that just stays there unfilled, almost across the board. I think each demarcation has subtle and not so subtle differences, but by and large, absence is absence.
When a person has absence, how does that manifest?
Well, it manifests, I'll tell you, not only through one's psychology, but also in the body. Also in the way one is in the world. So without the parental foundations, you could say, and, you know, I have to take into account also single parents.
Yeah.
You know, because we have to be fair. We live in a society where there are many constellations of family. And there's a very interesting analyst called Andre Green. He was French psychoanalyst. But what he spoke about was absence, saying that even if there's absence, see, here's the hope. Even if there is absence, there is something in the psyche which automatically imagines a father figure. And that helps save somebody who's had the absence of a father, a good father. Equally, if the mother figure has had good father experiences herself, she passes something on that helps. It's not the same, but it certainly helps.
And I would imagine if there are father-like figures or grandfathers or even mentors and role models, perhaps that makes a difference.
Do you know, it is so interesting you say that.
Yes.
Because just yesterday, someone spoke about their emotionally not absent father, but rather vacuous, about this much emotional depth, not much, but what had affected them and where they got a wealth of material and reflection and good feedback, grandfather. So I'm so glad that you say that, because there are many people that can substitute for the absence of the father, for sure.
Tell me about your book and the motivation behind that.
Yeah. And I don't think we fully went into total effect on the person, the daughter.
Okay, we can do that, but
but this is part of it. The book actually has evolved over quite a few years, and from not only the people that I see, where I kept on getting the same lack or same non-reflection back about father, and not thought about it, not ever thought, oh gee, I'm in pain and I wish. So there was that. There were also a lot of friends, colleagues, who equally had a very similar experiences. And then I started looking also in the literature and in the psychological literature, in the analytical literature, until about maybe 30 years ago. Fathers had one line. So when you read and you read case studies, father was ... and that's all you hear about him. As if he doesn't exist. So it was an area that I thought, this has not been explored. And what has then been the effect? One, because it hasn't been explored, and also the fact itself of absent fathers. So all of that is part of where the book evolved.
I had some thoughts as you're talking, about the literature and, fathers being absent. And while there may be, I think there's also a societal expectation that, gender norms when it comes to parenting.
Oh, you bet. Yes.
Right. And even it shows up in court and other places when families divorce or when there's child custody matters. But I also wonder about some of the literature that I've come across recently in terms of why fathers might show up. It could be more indicative of boys also not showing up as well. Specifically, what I mean by that is some of the literature suggests, and the research studies suggest, that boys are oftentimes more abused than girls.
Physically abused?
Physically, emotionally,
yes.
You name it, they are often subjected to more. Yes. And so I'm wondering if some of what we're seeing is a product of that.
I think you're right, but the other awful piece is that who usually will abuse them? Well, I was going to say it's the father, but that isn't always true. So, you hear these horrifying stories of the parent throwing the kid against the wall
Yeah.
or taking the belt out. Everybody on my street got hit. Really? Where did you get that from?
Yeah.
As if it's all right. And I think that you're right. The damage of being abused, and also not just physically, but also sexually and emotionally abused, means that a man, a male, would certainly turn away from connection,
Mm-hmm.
hurtful. And so their reaction to the, is a popular term now, but it's actually true, from the trauma of being abused means that they just turn away from any connection because they're afraid that they will do the exact same thing.
Absolutely. And I think there's a part of objectification and dehumanization of men sometimes.
Yes.
When people think of them as just these sort of obtuse, abusive, or absent individuals sometimes, or these men that just have all this power. And so I think there can be sort of this categorization, and I'm not saying that's here, but I think sometimes that can be part of why men don't show up as much, if that makes sense, because there's a lack of the dehumanization there. I wonder about that.
I would agree with you, but we could also say generationally,
Yes.
who is dehumanizing
Yes.
the male and creating the stereotype of the patriarchal, authoritarian, disciplinarian, narrow role that people then fall into. And sadly, women then project that also onto men and will give them, so it's a strange shift of power, will
Mhm.
give them the power that they have themselves. So the man I can't stand this patriarchy, right? This authoritarian whatever. But you see, it's been also given away. And that woman, daughter, person does not use their own authority and their own sense of stability and their own sense of rightness to be able to put forth who they are. You know, the I don't want to be totally political about this, but currently Roe v. Wade told us a lot about fathers and daughters.
Mhm.
I'm extending
Sure.
it, but it really did. And the who owns whose body, which is also another effect of an absent father, is that he doesn't learn to foster the female in her physical self, however she wants to identify. However, okay, her own strength, you could say her strength, her loveliness. I don't mean that in that classical beauty sense, but her internal essence. He doesn't do that. And she learns to accept not being seen for her talents, her ability, her brains, her strength. It becomes a very sad story. Kind of all these layers, if we unpeel it, you can see the effects again on the body very strongly.
What happens to women emotionally as they grow up and they start seeking out relationships of their own?
Yeah. Well, you know, a lot of them repeat what they knew.
Mhm.
So the absence of the father becomes the absence of the partner. Again, no matter what sex or however they identify,
Mhm.
they find absence. Absence emotionally, absence physically. They might find abuse as well. So we always tend to repeat what we knew until we go, oops, something is wrong here. And then people start to look inside. They start to understand. They start to change. And the choice then of partners might have to change as well.
One thing I'd be curious of, and I don't know if this is something that you've sort of looked at in depth or not, is actually what happens when the father is absent to the father.
What do you mean the father absent to the father?
If the absentee father, what happens to him?
Oh, what happens to him? Oh.
Like in terms of,
Uh,
yeah, what's happening emotionally? What's happening to him in sort of how he shows up in the world?
yeah, I agree with you. I address it a little bit in the book as well, because I feel that the mourning and the loss the daughter goes through is also something that the father needs to go through himself. Unfortunately, the older we get, the more rigid we become unless we gain awareness. And also, we tend to be kind of stuck in the era in which we are raised, unless we become conscious. So those fathers, sometimes they live out very sad, empty lives, some of them not even conscious of what they are missing out on because they don't know it. It's like if you have never had chocolate and you like chocolate, you don't know that it tastes good. So emotionally, they don't know what is on the other side. And they remain rather flat and dull. And perhaps they just kind of live out a flat existence. Some of them become open to their daughters who would say, let's start talking. Or some fathers, not too many that I've come across, but it's possible, might say to their daughters, let's examine our relationship. How are we really? Doesn't happen much, but it might be happening more. There's more acceptance of it. I find it very sad that people aren't curious about the pain of the absence, because it actually hurts if you really look at it.
I think so. And I think that's the part that often gets overlooked, and why that there's like that aspect of dehumanization. It's because it's like, if you're not there, you don't care. And in some cases that may be true, where you have people that just don't care. But in some cases, like for example, if you have an avoidant, a father who has an avoidant attachment style, or maybe even fathers that are incarcerated or are struggling with addiction or something to the like, there is often an emotional turmoil that they kind of go through, I think.
Yes, I think you're right. Several men that I've worked with who are fathers, when you said addiction, so quite a few of them fall into like a sexual addiction. They're on the internet, they're into pornography, they go to strip clubs, who knows, a million different things. But once they start to become aware, what am I doing? Why am I shut off from myself? And why am I shut off from my children? And how did my addictive behavior or my absence affect them? And several of them, as they become aware of what they have lacked and how they have put that onto the next generation, because that's also what happens. The conscious and the unconscious of the parents go on to the next generation. So we get to work out ourselves what we have inherited and what we want to pass on. Quite a few of them. as they get intrigued with being a person with emotions rather than a blank screen, literally, they go, oh, they start dealing with their children. Oftentimes these are adult children, and they start talking and they initiate the talking. So it can really, so out of all of my kind of, this is a very dark subject. No, it's also got hope. Just if you can just open to what has been quite fearful.
Absolutely. And I'm quite sure there's people that are listening to the show that's struggled with their father being absent. And I think one of the things that's important to point out as you're talking about fathers who reconnect with their children, especially if they've been absent, is the intention of the reconnection is important, and the motivation to change, I think, is very important.
Yes, I agree with you. But are you implying that there is a malintent?
There can be.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, there can be with some folks. Yes.
Yes, and that is something equally to deal with. So
Mm-hmm.
intent in a very heartfelt way,
Mm-hmm.
the intent in, uh-oh, they're being taken advantage of. And there is something also that is somehow very difficult for all of us, but is to be very honest and name the intent. Yeah. So I feel that your intent is malicious, or I feel that your intent is heartfelt. It really helps. It's something to learn. I don't know why we don't learn it, but we don't. We learn to love.
Say feelings and sort of humanize the situation again. Again, if someone's been gone from your life, and people experience things in their lives in the absence of a parent, in the absence of a protector.
Right.
And so if someone were to circle back, you might be guarded, rightfully so. You don't know this person.
That is absolutely right. And so hopefully usually it's an adult child, right? The time the father would circle back. And you're right, it has happened. Actually, I just remember several people that I've worked with, daughters, and well, you see, they circled back to find the father. They found the father. And when they found the father, it didn't work out so well. The father had another family. They were hurt. This is not unusual. They were hurt. They tried to express it. The fathers couldn't change. Now, some fathers could change some. Some took advantage of their daughters. And I mean in a sexual way. Because you see, they came back. And now here's an adult woman. This is not the daughter. It's an adult woman. And they took advantage sexually. Also because that adult woman, even though she looks an adult, she actually is still young in relation to the father, usually in relation to the time that he left her. So many fathers leave 3, 4. So that's how old she is when she finds him as an adult. So there's the malintent. The good intent can be that plays a little bit ideal, but it can be real, where there is a reestablishment in a process of time. We can get to know each other. One of the things also that helps is people dreaming about their fathers, or dreaming about father figures, or their grandfather, as you had mentioned. And it really helps clarify, who am I carrying inside? And also, how am I absent? like my father was.
Mm.
It happens. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. And the other thing I would think too is as you're as someone is making, if a woman is growing up and making her own connections or trying to, in an intimate relationship, I think there's a couple of different ideas that I have in terms of women that are attempting to, connect with a man, especially in an intimate partnership, if they've grown up as being fatherless. Um, part of the part of the idea that I have is that women should learn to connect with men first in a non-sexual way. So not intimate partnerships, but also just maybe if you can have friendships or mentorships with men and get in a point where you learn how to have these relationships with men that are healthy, where they sort of look out for you, and it's very reciprocal, and you sort of have these conversations before attempting to making these intimate connections.
I think you have a point. I'm going to expand it to say that is also true of same-sex relationships.
Yes.
To establish friendship because, or friendship in the sense of getting to know the essence of each other and taking time. We live in a society of images and quick date on the whatever, and that is the truth of our story. And people have a tendency to go straight in rather than wait a second, what is happening here? But you have to have some knowledge inside of what you lacked. Otherwise, the go for it is to fill the lack. We don't know if that person can fill it or not. And usually people will choose someone who's also absent. No matter what the gender is, they'll choose somebody absent, and then they can't even get the friendship. They just get sex for a while. And then it peters out because it's kind of, that's all there is, right? Then you have to move on to the next. And then you repeat the absent father.
What is it that people can do to sort of stop repeating the cycle?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think that's part of why I mentioned about hope. Because I think if we realize how bleak the story is, so if you realize how lousy it is, it's right in your face and you can't escape it. And you can only go up from there. So the up is self-knowledge, self-respect, self in so many ways. Self as in selfish, healthy self, taking care of oneself. As I said, looking at dreams. Of course, I'm kind of into analytical work. So I believe, and for myself and others, that it works to look in depth, not to look for 2 sessions, but to really examine thoughtfully, because it brings up the value of one's person. Absence tends to leave us without value. So we don't value our body, mind, intellect, soul. We tend to devalue them. And unfortunately, through the generations, the devaluation of women, also men, but in this story, the devaluation of women has been sadly very prevalent for years. Still, I still meet up with people who come to my office and they will say, I want to find a partner who makes more money than me. And why is that? It's not that they can't make money. It's that they learned, I'm less. I always say, why don't you make the money?
Or they've learned that, excuse me, they've learned that security comes in, or security comes in the way of someone sort of providing money or
Exactly.
material, safety. Because if you think about it, that's what we're taught. If you
Exactly.
think about it on a U.S. societal level, anyway, is that
Yes.
men
Yes.
are providers.
Mm.
Women want men who are providers, and men want women for youth and beauty.
Right. But okay. But what happens as youth and beauty continues through life? I'm not being facetious. I'm being, we really have the opportunity out of all this lack of good attention to create the energy for the entirety of life and beauty throughout life, but not in some narrow description, but in a very fuller way. And psychologically, as we understand what has happened to us, what we've wanted and needed, and this is also true for men and fathers, we start to appreciate that we can be lovely and full of energy and ideas, creativity through our entire life. If there's too much absence, or even you said earlier, and I do think it happens, that people become ashamed of the absence of the father. Yeah, they do. And you mentioned about incarceration, or you could say the father who never came to visit, the daughter waits and waits, he never comes. Where is he? How many daughters are going to say he's in jail? So one becomes ashamed of the father. And fathers also carry this through the generations as well. We don't realize what is in our cells and how much from, you said it, how much from our USA culture do we almost blindly believe? We just accept it. Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should challenge what we've been taught, so we create something else. And that's really the point of the book as well, which is out of the wounded places, the traumas that you've said, the abuse, the upset, the lack, comes, whoa, how will I develop from it? How will I use all that energy to create and be myself?
I'm thinking about the listeners who may be listening to you. It may be carrying, a burden of pain, from a father figure who hasn't been there. And still continues not to be there.
Right.
And, I know that a large part of what we've been talking about is humanization, and also looking at the other angle, which I know for some can be very unpopular, or very, they may be trying to reconcile, like, and sort of deal with their own pain. Like, listen, he wasn't there, he didn't care, or he did this to me. So I'm wondering about listeners who may be listening to you who are not in the space, or who have been perhaps violated or experienced some things at the hands of their father that they just can't. It's a deep, very deep wound, and they, sort of humanization or looking at the other person is something that they're not in a place to do yet.
Well, also, it's a good question, because the popular way is to forgive. there are some things you don't forgive, and you actually don't need to. And forgiveness, it does not equal self-knowledge. It just says, I forgive. It doesn't say, what have I learned? Because in some situations, maybe in many, that to the outer world don't look terrible, to the world inside and behind the closed doors were awful. And why does one need to reconcile? Why do you need to? You need to know yourself. You need to know why it doesn't fit to reconcile. I'm going to be completely on the other side because that requirement, it's a social requirement. You can see it happens on Father's Day. Send him a card. Absolutely. Do this, do that. I can't stand him. Why should I do that? Oh, send him one that doesn't say anything. Maybe the answer is don't. Or maybe the answer is to be very clear with the Father. You know, this is what happened. I haven't seen anything different. I'm on my own path, journey, whatever. Contact me when you feel like you can be a real person and know what you have done.
Is there a way that a person can continue to reconcile their own feelings of loss, abandonment, hurt, rejection? Rejection is a big one.
Yes.
Or abuse, just of that abuse. Because I also think there's also the emotional abuse too, right? That can happen when you have fathers that may promise to show up and never do.
True. I think there's a process. It's not really linear. It's more of a circular kind of process. Admitting, grieving, mourning, loss, and also finding oneself along the way, one's own creativity, one's energy, one's direction in life, goals of no matter what age. It's interesting because I've seen it's been quite amazing, many women in their 70s who have contacted me about issues with their fathers, unresolved issues. So, and as we have worked on it, the clarity that has come has not been, I'm going to contact my father in my 90s.
Sure.
Or the father that's dead, which also is.
Right. Very
common. Yeah. But what happens is I'm going to have a different relationship than I have. I'm going to reveal more. I'm going to be more open. I'm going to pay attention to what I have always wanted to do. I always wanted to paint. It's just an example. Okay, paint. I always wanted to do this. Go for it. So the answer to dealing with the father that you don't want to deal with is you don't need to. You do need to develop yourself. That's the need. And that's the residue of the hurt, is no energy to deal with oneself. So the more the energy is released through self-knowledge, the more you can be creative.
Outwardly, because I think part of which we touched on, I think something we touched on, but we didn't go in depth. I think something that also happens when we have someone who's absent for whatever the reason is, we start to create stories in our mind. We sort of fill in the blanks imaginatively about the way this person looks, thinks, feels, and why they did what they did, or what may happen down the road. So it sounds like the women that you're encountering at your 70s, like they're wanting to do things that perhaps this sort of imaginative or wishful thinking has prevented them from doing. So part of the work I'm hearing, and what I've also seen, is letting go of the mental block, the mental resistance of what you imagined that this was, or just sort of the force that this has in your conscience.
That is true. Why I also mentioned therapy or some kind of depth work is when you have a witness with you,
Yes.
you have somebody who's really partnering along with, you say the story out loud. And as you say the story, it can really be looked at for its storyline, its reality, and its illusionary quality.
Yeah.
And the more the illusions drop,
Yeah.
the more the energy for oneself lifts, and you're not deluding yourself any longer.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with a client and they just mentioned something and I'm like, where did that come from? What made you think that that happened? And they just sort of overcompensated and filled in the blanks on their own. And they do that with assigning emotions. They assign, well, they must have felt this way. This is why they acted this way. And, we just sort of do the fill in the blanks. And that's sort of I guess that's sort of a self-soothing mechanism.
It's self-soothing. It's what I said earlier, where a lot of women that I have worked with say, well, he's an introvert, or he's a very quiet person, or my mother is a big presence. I mean, none of these actually they totally make sense, but they
Yeah.
don't make sense. And as the person starts to say this, and the words and the story gets examined, they can really see, I made up a story. I needed to. I made up that story when I was 5. I remember that I made up the story. How many people make a bargain with themselves?
Yes.
I know I have to stay here. I'm 5 years old. I don't like it, but I have to stay. Oh, so many. And so they make up the story to be able to stay. Unfortunately, the story stays. And that's why inner work helps, because you can unpack the story and you can find yourself and the part that got lost a bunch of years ago.
I also wonder about the people who sort of lock their father away in in a mental closet, kind of like those people that I never want to talk about him. I don't want to think about him. What are your thoughts about that?
My thought is they're going to have some bad guys in their dreams. My thought is that their psyche, the naturalness of the psyche, will come forward and they will find Hitler's hanging out in their dreams. Or some guy that's got a gun is going to kill him. Or this one, or, extreme examples, or nightmares. And that is going to shake them up so that they are able then to take out that feared father and be able to deal with him inside of themselves. Because if you lock something in the box, well, you have to keep locking it. And there goes your energy. Make sure that it's locked. Make sure that it's locked. I just give one quick dream, just a sentence of the dream, which is longer. This woman dreamt, she didn't have a great father relationship either, but she dreamt that there was in her closet a little door way at the back, and she thought it was locked. Just what you say, it was open. And when she woke up, she thought, oh my goodness, what will I do with that open door? And there it was. Open it, see what's in it. The dream just was like, okay, open this book, see what you have. Take out what might be behind that little door.
How does that show up in real life when you lock someone away like that?
I think, so I'm going to give a negative hard side, just as an extreme, you don't really develop your talent. And also, you wreck your body. You wreck your body in a variety of ways. You destroy yourself in ways you might even look successful. Your relationships are horrifying. Horrifying in sense, empty, boring, awful. I don't like it. And you live in a very tiny space in your head and nobody knows you. It's a very lonely, sad existence.
So your external world really becomes very small.
Very small, even though outwardly it might look different. Inwardly, you know, it's like when you look at yourself in the mirror at 2 a.m., you just know. So again, your dreams will automatically help you get awake. Things will happen in your life that will help you get awake so you can live your life fully. Because it's a tragedy if you don't live all your talents.
Yeah, and I think ultimately with what you're saying, that regardless of whatever you choose to do when it comes to that relationship or lack thereof, is to be sure to make sure that you develop a relationship with yourself and don't allow that to block you from all that the world has to offer.
That's exactly right. And that's the hope. And that's what treatment, any psychological endeavor seeks, is to expand the world. And if our world is expanded, there is a possibility that the rest of the world might gain consciousness as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, this has been very informative. I've learned a lot. Susan, can you tell us, how the listeners can find you, if you have things that you're sort of working on or doing that we can support you with that are coming up?
Thank you so much. I must say, I've appreciated also your commentary in our back and forth discussion, because we seem to be on a similar line here.
Yes, I love that. I love when that happens. Yes.
Explore the psyche. So people can find me on www.susanschwartzphd.com. And my book, The Absent Father Effect on Daughters, Father Desire, Father Wounds, is from Routledge, the publisher. It's also on Amazon, Karnak, and whatever million book sites there are online. And I am having another book come out next year, also from Routledge, on the as if personality, which is a bit of an extension of this and yet something quite different. It relates to the imposter syndrome. So thank you.
Thank you. I love that. And I'm so happy that you came on to talk with us today.
Me too. I am happy as well.